Hey everyone, hope you're doing well, and certainly hope you've been thinking carefully about your research topics over the past couple of weeks. In this week, we're beginning to move from that stage to a new stage. That is when we'll be thinking about moving from topics to research questions. And of course, thus far, over the past couple of weeks, we've been thinking about our topics using a couple of useful sort of heuristic questions that hopefully you've been practicing in your studies. The first is, what explains variation in blank? Where blank essentially comes to occupy the position of the topic. Or if you want to do things sort of backwards, as we'll see later in today's lecture, what does variation in blank influence is also a very useful heuristic question to better understand what makes for a good topic. And certainly if that is foreign to you, if you've never seen these before, go back to the previous module and you will find all the answers that you seek there. But of course, if we've done this, if we've created this useful research topic, it's time now to sort of get rid of these training wheel kind of questions that exist and think about how to transition from the topic, that is the thing inside those blanks that we've created, how to transition that topic and build it into a tractable research question, which has a lot more bells and whistles than these kinds of little training wheel questions that we've constructed to help us design the topic. So, here's some examples of topics that would work for this course. One thing would be, what explains variation in European countries' rates of voter turnout? So you can see here we could, conceive of potentially studying these different European countries and, which of them have high rates of voter turnout and which of them have low rates of voter turnout. So again, engaging, as always, in that comparative kind of logic that we will, be adopting in causal empirical research. Another one might be, what does variation in the volume of newspaper headlines about the national debt influence? So this again, going back to that second sort of heuristic device, what does variation in blank influence? We can ask ourselves, we might think about newspapers, we might get a daily newspaper or we've seen them on newsstands. We might think to ourselves, if we're interested in headlines in those newspapers, what happens when people start talking about the national debt in those headlines? Does that have an effect on the way that the American public thinks? Does that have an effect on the kinds of policies that are passed in the United States? What happens when people start paying attention to the national debt is kind of the broader question. Another one might be, what explains variation in Americans, this is a typo, Americans' belief that the economy is strong? Americans, move that apostrophe for correct grammar. Americans believe that the economy is strong. So if people think the economy is strong, what affects that? What is the effect of some other variable on Americans' willingness to believe this? Because certainly this might vary. Some Americans today think that the economy is very strong. Others think that the economy is very weak. So I want to know why some of them think the one thing and others think the other. A fourth tractable sort of research topic might be South American countries' import-export balance. So what explains why some South American countries import a lot of things and don't have a lot of exports? Why do some other South American countries have a lot of exports but not a lot of imports? Certainly we could think about some of the potential political determinants, because of course this topic has to be political in some way, of this already. And then finally, this is an interesting one because I know that many people have very strong opinions about this. What does variation in Americans, and here the apostrophe is in the right place, thankfully, what does variation in Americans' exposure to violent video games influence? So again, this is another turning the question on its head kind of thing, where we're trying to think about a topic and we're interested in what kinds of effects that topic might have. So violent video games, if Americans are playing these violent video games, are they any different than people who don't play violent video games? Again, with that comparative logic. So we've got 5 different topics here that would all work for the purposes of our course right now. And they work partially because we can think about the fact that they're pure, that is, they're designed to answer a question for the question's sake, right? It's just research for research's sake. We want to find out the answer so we can enlighten ourselves and an audience. We don't have an agenda in creating these questions. Also, these are empirical, which means that in the back of our heads, we're thinking about whether or not we can measure these things using available data. It might be possible to create a new data set to do this, or it might be possible to use existing data to measure these concepts that will eventually turn into, this is a preview of coming attractions, they will eventually turn into variables. So these topics, from our sort of baseline perspective, seem to be pure and empirical. But again, the third aspect of good research in this course is that the research is also causal. And so causal research is not simply descriptive. And I remember in previous modules, I used the example of what kind of birds are there on UMBC's campus? So we could, go bird watching and count birds. That's a descriptive sort of research question. And we could answer it. We could say there are 17, loons. There are 18 egrets. There are 14, pigeons, like whatever, right? We're counting the birds and we're letting an audience know, here's how many birds there are. Here they are. Here's a list of them. That's a descriptive kind of exercise where we just want to know what's out there. But of course, with a causal link that we're interested in, we want to propose an explanation for variation in the topics that we've proposed. So really, this is the crux of this, is to use what I call another heuristic Mad Libs. And so this is just another fill in the blanks kind of exercise where we can ask ourselves, what is the effect of some new thing that we haven't thought about yet on the topic we're researching among that population that we have identified so nicely in our research topics, that population we foreshadowed in our topic. So if we go back to the topic list here that we're working with as examples, right? European countries' rates of voter turnout. We know the population here is European countries. The volume of newspaper headlines. We know that the population is probably U.S. daily newspapers. Americans believe that the economy is strong. Again, with that horrible typo I can't get over. It's Americans. It's just people, individual people's beliefs. So that population would be Americans. South American countries. In this case, our population is going to be made up of countries that fall into the South American geographical definition. And then again, here we have individual Americans as sort of the population, the relevant population. And so this, again, is why I think making a workable topic, why that first step is so important, and it's so important to take some time and really workshop this to get it right, is that we're introducing another blank here in our little heuristic. And if we don't have those first two blanks well established, where we have a good understanding of the topic we want to study, we think it's empirical, we think that it's pure, and then we also have identified a relevant and useful population that's going to fit into that third blank, then we're going to be in real trouble. And so ultimately, that's because these blanks are going to evolve. These blanks actually have more specific names that are going to be sort of foreshadowing some really big parts of the research process later in the course. And so the specific names of these blanks are the IV concept, the DV concept, and of course we have already the population. And so the IV concept is, for many of you who have opposed the research topic as this what explains variation in blank sort of heuristic. The IV concept is the new thing that you're looking at. And that's the thing that's doing the explaining. It's the answer to the question, right? I think that this is the reason why there's variation in our outcome. It is the thing that's causing an effect on variation in the topic. It's the thing that's causing this outcome, this thing that's already been in our topics to vary. And the DV topic, of course, is the topic itself that we've been studying if we've been using that same heuristic, what explains variation in blank. So this is the topic for which variation is observed that is crying out for an explanation. It says, please, I want you to explain me. And the IV concept finally comes along and says, this is the key. This is what's going on here. This is why some countries or people or newspapers or tweets or whatever, this is why there's high values of this in some places and there's low values of this in other places within the population. Variation in this new IV concept is the explanatory causal effect, or there's an explanatory cause that influences this outcome, that has an effect on the outcome. So again, what is the effect of this on that is the basic logic. Now, I do want to provide a caveat here. I know that previously I showed you two ways to propose a topic, and I think that this is certainly important to do, because I think many people come to these topics not with the question of what causes variation in blank, and for many people that might feel like a very artificial kind of construct. They might be interested in thinking about a topic from the other way around. That is, I know something about this topic, fill in the blank, whatever it might be. I know something about turnout in European countries. I want to know, what does that do? What kind of effects does it have, right? I know that millions of Americans use Twitter, and some Americans use Twitter for like 5 hours a day. what does variation in using Twitter all the time have an effect on? What does it influence? If people are super social media junkies, does that have an effect on some kind of downstream thing in their lives, on their stress, on their anxiety, on their fear of FOMO or fear of missing out, right? On their political perceptions and political attitudes? All kinds of things that I think are useful to know about. And so if you had it this way around, if you thought about, essentially filling in the blank using this heuristic question, then essentially you have done it sort of backwards, and that's fine. I think it's not a long logical leap to get you to the same Mad Libs that we just looked about, right? The thing that's going to happen here is that your research topic is now going to flip around, and it's going to change in name only. So essentially, the topic that you proposed no longer becomes the topic that you identify as your topic, even though it's still the thing you're researching. Okay, I know that sounds a little bit confusing, but essentially what you've done is you've proposed in your initial topic formation stage an IV concept. You've proposed this explanatory thing. You've said, I'm interested in this thing. I want to know what kinds of effects it has. Now, as you, for the first time, identify the specific effect you want to study, that is the DV concept that it's acting upon, now in name only in your paper, this new thing that you've proposed is actually going to become the topic that you're talking about. You're going to go back to that. What is the effect of this on that? The DV concept is always going to be the thing that you characterize as your research topic. But secretly, this IV concept is the thing you're really super interested in, and the thing that drove the generation of this research question in the first place. Regardless of which way you did it, everyone is going to end up with a research question that conforms to this exact format. And as a result, no one's going to know that you were really thinking about the IV concept first and not the DV concept, as opposed to other people who might have come up with the DV concept first and then proposed some sort of cause. Regardless of how you do it, everyone's going to end up with this format with both an IV concept and a DV concept. And regardless of which one sparked your interest, it's the relationship that ultimately forms the subject of study, ultimately informs the kind of research that you're actually going to be doing and the answer that you're going to be seeking to obtain in the study. Because at the end of the day, this full thing is the thing we're trying to answer. What is the effect of one thing on another thing among a population? Can we obtain a clear understanding of what that effect actually is? And how do we do it? And that's going to be the task that's our task for essentially the rest of the semester, is actually once we proposed this research question, and you can see now why we've had to build it up in stages, because it's actually a fairly complicated sort of development. Once we've built this up and we've got this exactly in the format we want it to be in, can we answer it? And that is the task that remains to us over the next, several sessions and all the way until the end of our course. So in just a moment, I'll be talking in the next module, Module 3.2, about pitfalls and about ways in which our research questions might not quite be in the right format. But hopefully for now, you've at least been able to slot in these three sort of Mad Libs fill in the blanks as you work towards your research question. So follow me on to Module 3.2, and we'll start talking about some potential problems you might encounter.